The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've been hearing speculation and sort of early reports about this for a couple of weeks now, and I've told you about it, but it is very quickly becoming a real thing. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's investigation into potential Trump-Russia collusion and related crimes has not only now reached Donald Trump's cabinet, which we'll talk about shortly, about Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Mueller now believes it's time to talk to President Donald Trump. And specifically, as reported by the Washington Post, Mueller wants to talk to Trump about the circumstances and situation surrounding his decision to get rid of indicted National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, his decision to get rid of FBI Director James Comey, as well as his efforts to remove Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. And this is clearly an investigation that is looking into, among other things, possible obstruction of justice by Trump and those around him. Now, I've got to warn you in advance. Do not allow yourself to be tricked. The right will say, and they've already been saying, I saw it on corporate media last night, this is no big deal. It's not concerning that Mueller briefly wants to talk to Trump. But when the sitting president of the United States is sought for an interview by a special prosecutor who was appointed after that same sitting president fired the FBI director, this is a big deal. This is a criminal investigation. And in fact, I would encourage you to consider how reality has departed from the Trump narrative more and more quickly. Trump and his defenders were originally insisting this would never even get to an investigation. And when the investigation started, they said, well, it's going to lead to nothing and it's going to end quickly. Well, it led to 4 indictments in 2017 alone. And then the Trumpists said these indictments have nothing to do with Trump nor the campaign. These are alleged crimes that people loosely connected to Trump committed before they were even involved with Trump's campaign, which of course isn't true, but that's what they've been saying. And then they said it would never actually get to the inner circle, and it would end very quickly. Trump talking about it'll be over by Thanksgiving. It'll be over by the end of 2017. And it is 2018, and it has now reached Jeff Sessions, and we'll talk about that next, as I mentioned, and it is close to reaching Donald Trump. This is the exact opposite of what the Trumpists and Trump himself told us was going to happen. So what's actually going to happen with this potential Trump interview? Well, Trump's lawyers, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, they are trying to negotiate the most favorable possible terms for Trump to do this interview. The most favorable terms for Trump would be no interview at all, right? A sort of written questionnaire from Robert Mueller, which Trump would put together answers to with his lawyer, which I can't imagine Robert Mueller is going to accept. Next would be sort of a hybrid where, yes, Trump shows up in person and he answers some questions, but says, I'm going to have to get back to you in writing to as many questions as possible. And obviously, the less restricted the interview is, the more likely it becomes that Trump will tie himself into a knot and self-incriminate, because self-incrimination, Trump's own tweets and statements are responsible for the investigation even having gotten to the point where it is now. So what will be next for Republicans? Well, is it going to be draft the memo and talk about releasing the memo exclusively, start some fake scandal, bomb someone to take attention off of this? Because the attention must be removed from this. And this is, you know, at this point, Pat, how can anyone say that this is worthless if a special prosecutor has said, I want to talk to the president to figure out what's going on? This is not nothing. It doesn't mean Trump has committed a crime necessarily, but it's not nothing.
Yeah, and it's not even surprising, too. This is a long time coming, really.
Of course.
And you know these prosecutors, I mean, they're cunning, they're meticulous. They could easily trap Trump into a lie. I mean, if you even think back to that Lester Holt interview after he fired Comey, he just kind of offered this idea that he fired Comey because of the Russia investigation.
Yes.
If he's backed into a corner, caught in his contradictions, he's going to admit to a lot worse, I think.
And that was Lester Holt, who gave him no shortage of opportunities to say anything but that, right? Trump volunteered that himself. Now, if this happens, and we should know within a week or 10 days, we should know what is ultimately going to happen with this potential sit down with Donald Trump and Robert Mueller's team. What story can we expect headline Fox News to run and Drudge Report if this actually happens? Tonight, we explore whether Hillary was at the Uranium One meeting, and is Obama to blame for Carrier laying off 500 people? We'll tell you next, with no mention whatever of the Donald Trump sit down with Robert Mueller.
Yeah, my favorite one is that we need a special investigation inside this special investigation into
The
Donald Trump.
special investigation needs to be investigated.
Right.
And for that, we need, it's like the Russian Matryoshka dolls of successive special investigations into those investigations.
I want Jeanine Pirro or Judge Napolitano to run it, perhaps.
Yeah, Judge Jeanine Pirro would be the top person to run such an investigation into the investigative nature of special investigations. So, speaking of investigations, for an investigation that was never going to exist, the Trump-Russia investigation is seeming increasingly serious. Not only did we learn in the last 24 hours that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller wants to interview Donald Trump himself, we've also learned in the last 24 hours that he did interview Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The investigation has officially and formally reached Donald Trump's cabinet. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who has already been caught lying at least twice during previous testimony related to contact with Russians, was questioned for hours on end by Robert Mueller's team. Sessions is ostensibly in charge of all law enforcement in the United States, and law enforcement is interviewing him in a criminal investigation. And this took place late last week, but we just learned about it this week. And as far as we know right now, this is the first time that Robert Mueller's team has reached a Trump cabinet member. It's possible that others have been interviewed and we just don't know about it, but it doesn't seem particularly likely right now. And there are two blockbusters here, okay? Blockbuster number one is, like I said, an investigation that we were told was never going to be anything has reached Donald Trump's cabinet. And recall that Trump said it would end by Thanksgiving, it would end by Christmas, it would end by New Year's, and it's 2018, and we're only just starting the investigation elements that involve Trump's cabinet members. This has a long way to go. But the bigger blockbuster in my mind is that this connects with even more possible obstruction of justice. Axios and others have reported that recently Jeff Sessions has been pressuring FBI Director Christopher Wray to fire the Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. McCabe has done nothing to warrant being fired, but we can imagine that his firing might help Trump in the context of the Russia investigation. And in fact, Trump has even publicly urged Sessions to fire McCabe. FBI Director Christopher Wray reportedly threatened to resign if McCabe was removed, according to three sources with direct knowledge. Sessions and Trump apparently had the good enough sense to realize, wait a second, we fired FBI Director James Comey. That led to a special prosecutor being appointed. It probably would not be good in terms of optics if now Andrew McCabe was fired at our urging. I'm speculating, but I guess maybe they had the sense to realize that this would not go over particularly well.
Yeah, and this stems from McCabe being pulled into an office meeting by Donald Trump after Trump fired Comey, because I guess McCabe's wife ran for state senate in Virginia.
I believe
and
so.
Received a campaign contribution from the former Democratic governor of Virginia. So Trump pressured McCabe into telling him who he voted for in 2016 and wanted to find out if he was a Democrat.
What a bizarre question, right? Getting pulled in there. I need you to tell me who you voted for in the last election. And this is even more relevant now that we know that last week Sessions himself was officially pulled into the investigation by Robert Mueller. This is way, way, way too involved with the details of law enforcement agencies and their staff. And it's another possible entryway into charges of obstruction of justice. So now there's a variety of questions. What will be the next indictments? Because clearly there's more indictments coming. Did Jeff Sessions change his tune on some of these issues when questioned by the special prosecutor's staff? Since even if you are the attorney general, it's still a crime to lie to investigators in this situation, even if you're Jeff Sessions. And hopefully Sessions' signature lines that he's known for, I don't recall, I find the question offensive, I wouldn't be able to tell you one way or the other off the top of my head. I'm hoping that those wouldn't fly when you're talking to Mueller's investigators, although I would guess if Sessions thought he could get away with it, he would probably try.
It's really crazy how this is all flipped on its head, right? I mean, Jeff Sessions, he's the attorney general, he's the top lawyer in the country, and yet he's being questioned over this?
He's the one being questioned by the people that are sort of generally speaking in terms of the organizational chart below him. At this time, if I were Jeff Sessions, it would be occurring to me to throw Trump totally under the bus, to go to Mueller's investigators and say, I want to tell you everything I know, come completely clean, and try to maybe get immunity from Mueller if he thinks that it's possible he would be implicated. Although, for some weird reason, Trump seems to have influence and people seem to remain loyal to him.
Well, I don't know. When Trump was pressuring Jeff Sessions to resign because Trump knew better than to just outright fire him, it seemed like Sessions wanted to stay put.
If he was doing that because he believed it was the right thing, it's possible that he might realize the right thing is to stop with the I don't recalls and I find the question offensive and instead say to Robert Mueller, here's everything I know. I would like to cooperate, as Michael Flynn, we now learn, did, and maybe get immunity from future prosecution. I don't know, but in the last 24 hours, we have learned that Jeff Sessions has already been pulled into this investigation and that Robert Mueller wants Trump pulled into it as well. If you thought it was going to be over by Turkey Day 2017, certainly it's going the opposite direction. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Let me know what you think about these recent developments.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Tyler Chernosky. Tyler, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. This is independent media. We're mostly funded by members like Tyler and our long-term sustaining members who are, I mentioned this yesterday, we're closing in on 8-year David Pakman Show members. That is quite a tenure. And we are also closing in on 1-year David Pakman Show patrons. You can find out about Patreon at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Let's get into Hatriot Mail for the week. Quick reminder, if you don't remember what Hatriot Mail is, this is what we're talking about.
We're so alt-right, it's wrong. Patriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman.
Yep.
Because America. And because freedom.
All right, this is a voicemail, a Hatriot Mail that I don't think will surprise you to hear did not come from an actual lawyer, even though they are making some legal suggestions for what Donald Trump should do to me. Let's take a listen to it together and see if we can decipher.
Parkman on fake news CNN. Is Parkman wearing makeup? So young to be so jaded. Refuses to open his eye. YouTube should ban him for actual propaganda. Old news, fake news, communist news. In fact, Trump should sue Pakman for libel.
That's right. We might have done something on the program that's libelous, not libelous, but libelous, and for that, Donald Trump should sue us. What's the deal with the makeup thing? Like, well, I don't wear makeup on the program, although I've been advised by a number of people that it might not be a terrible idea to toss a little powder on, just because of the shine of the bright lights, Pat. Yes, it's quite hot under the lights. But like, would that be effeminate if a man was wearing makeup on a television program?
Well, he's referencing the time that you were on CNN. So when you went on CNN years ago, were you wearing makeup for that interview?
Absolutely. I asked them to double it up. I needed as much of it as possible. Are you crazy? Under those lights with Erin Burnett? I don't want to show up and have her look at me like I'm chopped liver or something like that.
You look so young in that interview.
I said, please, and fill in my eyebrows. My goodness, I need as much help as possible here. Okay, I'm kidding about the filling in my eyebrows thing, but my eyebrows I think are thick enough on their own. But that's a topic probably not for a different day, but for never.
Yeah, and I think if Trump sued us for libel or libel, either one, he'd probably lose because he's done this before. He sued Bill Maher over an orangutan joke.
Yes.
He sued someone for saying that he's not a billionaire. He always loses these libel lawsuits.
If Trump sues us for libel, I would ask that a judge file an injection. I mean, why not, right? Just throw out whatever occurs to me. You can turn Patriot Mail. Pat liked that one, I think.
Yes.
You can turn Patriot Mail into something positive with the coupon code Patriot40. If you use the coupon code Patriot40 when you sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership, you get a 40% discount. And I don't know about you, but 40% off for 100% of the benefits sounds pretty good to me. If you're still skeptical about the intelligence community consensus that Russia meddled in our election to help Donald Trump, consider that they now have been caught meddling in the Trump-Russia investigation. California Democrats Dianne Feinstein and Adam Schiff, Senator Feinstein and Congressman Schiff, respectively, released a letter to the CEOs of Twitter and Facebook warning of possible Russian influence on the special counsel's investigation. A website monitoring Russian-linked Twitter accounts found that their use of the hashtag #ReleaseTheMemo is up 300,000%. Now, what is this release the memo thing? Release the memo relates to a House Intel Committee decision to give members of Congress a memo which supposedly outlines abuses of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, by the FBI. And there are some Republicans who read the memo who said they were shocked and even outraged about the contents of the memo, even though the memo itself is still classified, so they can't actually tell us what specifically are they so outraged by, right? They're saying it's outrageous what's in the memo, but we can't tell you what's so outrageous because it's classified. And it has become a fantastic distractor from the Trump-Russia investigation. And in fact, the David Pakman Show has been impacted by this as well. All over our YouTube channel, there's these poorly written troll comments, which typically are these foreign troll accounts that are looking to spread disinformation, talking about how the real issue is not the Trump-Russia investigation. It's not Jeff Sessions being questioned by Robert Mueller. It's release the memo. Twitter, right. Exact same thing. I'm getting floods of tweets saying, David, the real issue is and of our release the memo for is to justice and I am Trump, right? So like terribly written stuff, but what you can pick out from all of them, that's an imaginary example, is release the memo. If you look on Reddit, there are entire subreddits riddled with posts about release the memo. And whether or not this memo is scandalous isn't the issue. If the memo is scandalous, then we should find out about it, evaluate, and take action as necessary. But release the memo has no bearing or impact on Robert Mueller's path towards figuring out what happened, but that's how it's being used. Videos and social media posts about the Mueller investigation, and now it reaching Jeff Sessions and wanting to interview Trump, they get flooded with comments about release the memo, and I say, fine, release it, but allow the investigation to continue because they're two separate issues.
Well, it's interesting because one side says that this is a red herring and, you know, if there is something scandalous in that memo, it has no bearing on what the Mueller team finds.
That's my view.
The other side is that if they did obtain things unethically, perhaps without a warrant, then everything goes out the window. Because if it's like a police officer, you know, doesn't have a warrant and conducts a search on your house, they find drugs or something, they can't implicate you for the crime, you know?
Except if the Boston Police Department did that, and then you say a Cambridge police investigation is now tainted, we would say, well, hold on a second. The fact that the Boston police is accused of doing something doesn't mean a particular investigation by Cambridge police is now invalid. This is the Mueller investigation, and there is no evidence whatsoever that there has been anything untoward that has taken place there, despite the fact that the right likes to paint him as some kind of partisan hack. And if he is, he's a lifelong Republican. So I would ask, which party is he a hack for?
And there's also a difference between any potential criminal prosecution and political ramifications, like, say, an impeachment trial. That wouldn't be affected either.
No doubt about it. So what's going on here is that they want to create an environment where the Americans that, or Americans in general, if they could have it their way, see the FBI as the bad guys, not the good guys, and they've been doing it for some time, and the Russian troll bots are jumping on this release the memo thing bigly in order to try to continue distracting from what is it's a very quickly advancing investigation by Robert Mueller that now has reached Trump's cabinet and is pushing its way into the Oval Office. Okay, so I don't want to talk about what I'm about to talk about. That doesn't really make sense, right? But I do want to talk about it in the sense of telling you not to pay attention to it. And the only way to tell you not to talk about it is by talking about it. Does that make any sense? What the hell am I talking about? I'm talking about a new CNN poll that says Trump is losing to Bernie Sanders, that Trump is losing to Joe Biden, and Trump is losing to Oprah Winfrey in hypothetical 2020 presidential matchups. The polling, like a lot of CNN's polling, was done by SSRS, and it did a bunch of these imaginary 2020 general election matchups that assume Trump will be the Republican nominee. And if you interpret the poll literally, it seems like things are just going so well for everyone but Trump. Look at some of the matchups that the poll asked voters about. They said, if it was Trump versus Bernie Sanders, who would you vote for? Bernie comes out ahead 55-42, crushing Trump. If it was Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, who would you vote for? 57-40, Joe Biden ahead. And if it was Oprah against Trump, who would you vote for? According to the poll of registered voters taken this month, 51-42, Oprah would defeat Donald Trump. Now, there are a ton of internals we could look at and slice and dice the data, but I don't want to, because my message to you is this. Don't pay attention to this crap. Don't worry about 2020 right now. Number one, there are midterm elections in 9 months that could determine the future of the presidency, the future of healthcare, the future of net neutrality, which we're going to talk about with Craig Aaron today, the future of how we deal with climate change, to even start thinking about whether Oprah or Joe are better candidates for 2020 right now, before the 2018 midterms, before Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation really gives us more definition on what took place. This is a recipe for losing. That's number one. But even worse is seeing the numbers and thinking, oh, whoever runs against Trump is going to crush it, and I don't even need to be engaged politically or worry about 2018 or 2020. This is a recipe for disaster, and it's one of these weird things, Pat, because I don't want to give attention to 2020 polling.
Right.
But at the same time, this poll is getting so much traction and being posted so much online that I do want to get out ahead of it and say, if Oprah Winfrey would defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020 based on January 2018 polling, it should have no impact whatsoever on our political activism for the next 9 months and for the next 3 years.
Yeah, we got to get through the midterms. And even after that, maybe summer of 2019, we can start talking about 2020.
Sure.
And that's crazy because that's more than a year out of the election. And
but
by
it seems almost
standards,
late by recent standards.
That's crazy,
right?
yeah.
It's absolutely insane. Let me put it to you a different way, though, because maybe I want to be open. Since we're talking about it, let me at least explore a different position. Can you think of anything good that comes from focusing on a poll like this in January of 2018? Like, is there?
No.
You're the king of finding bizarre silver linings just to make ourselves feel like marginally better. Is there any that you can find in this?
I think it minimalizes the importance of policy if we just focus on the horse race.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been going on since the day after Donald Trump won the election. They were talking about 2020. Will Hillary run again? Will Joe Biden run again? Or Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
And we got to get beyond that, I think.
I tend to agree, and I just can't think of anything that we stand to gain by saying, well, Joe's polling 57% and Oprah's 51%, so therefore what, right? It's January of 2018. What difference does it make? And by the way, we're talking two of those three people are going to be close to 80 years old at the time of the 2020 election. And not to be ageist, but I do think that there is something to consider in terms of whether the Democratic Party wants to be the primary of nearly 80-year-old white dudes. I don't know. I'm just throwing the question out there. But I don't think we should say more about it.
Okay. Well, I'll say one more thing.
Okay, please.
I think people who are fans of Oprah are picking that out and saying, see, Oprah would crush Trump.
Yeah.
And probably ignoring the fact that Biden or Sanders would perform better. Yeah.
All right. We've discussed
We've
it.
done it.
I've told you why I think we shouldn't focus on this. And if you have more to say about it, by all means, join us on our subreddit, at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. After the break, we will welcome back, it's been a while since he's been on, CEO of Free Press, Craig Aaron. Not Aaron Craig. He's not Aaron Craig. He's Craig Aaron, and he doesn't like it when people mix that up. He'll join me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's been a little while, but it's great to welcome back to the show Craig Aaron, who is CEO and president of Free Press. As you can imagine, he has been very, very busy in the era of Trump and Ajit Pai and the repeal of Obama-era internet freedom and net neutrality regulations. So maybe let's start there, Craig. Are there ways that we can already see the recent repeal having an impact?
Yeah, on a couple levels, and thanks for having me back. I think what's been really fascinating and frankly inspiring about this moment after a big loss in terms of the repeal is that these rules haven't even officially taken effect yet. Like, we're still waiting for them to be published in the Federal Register. And we've seen some things on the corporate side, like indications of companies starting to rewrite their terms of service, starting to adjust the promises they allegedly made about how they were going to operate on the free and open internet. But the biggest change has been, honestly, a political awakening on net neutrality that's like nothing I've ever seen before. I mean, I've been working on this issue since 2005 and constantly touting the millions and millions of people that have gotten involved. But what we saw happen before Thanksgiving, when the FCC tried to sneak through changes to the rules, has unleashed a level of public awareness and engagement that's really unprecedented. And it's absolutely changed the political landscape on this issue. We've seen millions of people contacting Congress about net neutrality. At one point, offices were telling us they were getting more calls about net neutrality than they were getting about the tax bill, which is unfathomable. We were trying to organize events across the country to protest the rule change, and we were aiming to do 15. There ended up being 700. We've seen, in the days as Congress has come back in January, the drumbeat continuing to where we've got 50 senators on the record that they want to vote to overturn these rules. So we've seen this really, really remarkable political transformation. And we're seeing net neutrality show up in polling, in national political conversations. Somebody told me Burger King just made an ad with net neutrality references in it. So we're sort of new territory here. And that's what, despite, the really terrible vote that the FCC took in December, I'm actually sort of newly optimistic that we can actually push back, even overturn that vote, and that we're actually having a conversation that I've wanted to have forever, which is a conversation about the free and open internet and internet policy, much closer to the center of the national political conversation.
So let's talk about the overturning a little bit. I've been following what started as just a few Democrats in the Senate who said, we're going to try to use the Congressional Review Act to overturn what the FCC did. We saw that number swell to all 49 Democrats plus Susan Collins. But my view has been this might be really useful for campaigning in 2018 against Republicans and for Democrats. But even if it were to pass the Senate, it's not going to pass the House and Trump's not going to sign it. So can you assess not only the viability of that initiative, but also the sort of utility of it?
Sure. Well, I think I'm more optimistic for a couple of reasons. One is just this larger point about the political landscape is new. Net neutrality has been a hotly debated issue in Washington, but it's not one that offices were seeing this kind of public response. Every time a member of Congress tweets about net neutrality, they're getting hundreds of comments and 2,000-3,000 retweets, which is not what they get on their normal communications. We've had multiple offices tell us they got 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 calls on net neutrality, all of them opposing Ajit Pai, none of them supporting Ajit Pai. So Congress is sort of it's a stimulate. It can be stimulated by public interest. I'll say that. So Congress is imperfect, but when a lot of people are telling them to do something, to pay attention, they start to respond. And so that's what I think we're seeing in the Senate, where you've even got reluctant, Democrats that tend to really hew, to a relatively pro-corporate agenda or to a centrist agenda, saying, no, we've heard enough. Our constituents are cable customers too. We're going to sign on to overturn this. So we're very close. We need one more vote essentially in the Senate to be able to pass this bill. The House is a steeper climb, but I don't think it's impossible. I mean, you need 218 votes. So that's a lot of votes. But there are about 190 Democrats and a bunch of Republicans who are in districts where this is becoming an issue, or who are people who are really concerned about things like broadband privacy. We've seen, huge push from Republicans in Congress who really distrust the phone and cable company. They don't like overreach on spying. So these are all folks we can reach. And frankly, they're being reached by, people who aren't, groups that are considered progressive or left. The amazing thing that's happened on net neutrality is you look at a place like Reddit, and there was a point where net neutrality not only was, 24 of the top 25 stories on Reddit, one of the most heavily trafficked sites on the internet, but it was in all corners of Reddit. So net neutrality was being talked. It was the top item in the NASCAR discussion group. And it was being talked about in spaces talking about Black Lives Matter. So this is one of those issues that has gotten the attention of politicians who I think share your analysis, like, wait, this could really be something that is an issue in 2018. And that's what we're hearing. And that's new. We've wanted to make the internet an issue that was showing up in elections in the past. It hasn't really happened. Their own polling is telling them that this is something that's going to be showing up in 2018. And, I've had congressional offices tell me that when they look at young voters, they love to talk about millennials. It's sort of, when they talk about it, it sounds like they've discovered some exotic new undiscovered species. But, you hear these members of Congress talking about millennials, and they're saying, like, well, the things we see motivating them are net neutrality and marijuana legalization. Mm. So, like, that's a list. If you're a net neutrality advocate like me, that's a pretty interesting list to be on. So I think the politics haven't, I think the politics haven't fully played out here yet. And we're still a ways away. I mean, this bill that has 50 co-sponsors hasn't even been introduced, because it can't be introduced until the rules are official. And with government shutdowns and everything else, there's been a delay in that. So that's a political fight that we're excited to have. And certainly Donald Trump is still president and may indeed still be president when this bill arrives on his desk. And, obviously, if it showed up today, that's a bill he's going to veto. But I think there's a lot to still play out. So I see a genuine opportunity to pass this bill. It's certainly not, a 90% chance it's going to pass, but it's a real chance. And, certainly a chance to make this an issue that's part of the political discussion as we move in to this next election cycle, which is going to be a very contentious election, obviously. And the fact that net neutrality is, even on that list of issues is something that I think has completely changed the politics around this. And you see that in the way that the opponents are responding. Today, AT&T bought full-page ads in a bunch of newspapers, saying, oh, no, we actually love net neutrality and we want an internet bill of rights that isn't.
Well, let's touch on that a little bit, because you mentioned the terms and conditions stuff. We've been following that. So there's different perspectives. There are people who point to the changes that we've seen in some of the terms and conditions and pledges that different internet service providers have made. And they say, yeah, these aren't really substantive changes. These are sort of small updates that you would expect to take place. There's a whole other side of the spectrum which says, no, these rewordings that you're seeing are deliberately or sort of setting up the internet service providers to take full advantage of the repeal of the FCC net neutrality regulations. Where do you see it? Like, do those terms and conditions changes really open the door to what we're likely to expect to be major changes in how these internet service providers handle data?
I think it's the beginning of it. I would say a couple things. One is that because there's still active legislation, because there's still an active court case, which we can talk about, there's still some incentives that say these companies need to be on pretty good behavior. Mm-hmm. Because if they get caught in a major net neutrality violation in this political environment on this issue, they're going to have a very hard time making the case that the rule shouldn't be reinstated, and it's going to look bad in front of the judges. So they're looking for the things that are more subtle, that are around the edges, that they can do. But I think it does matter when you see them saying, oh, we're not going to block websites and we're not going to do this. But yes, we did erase all the things about paid prioritization, where we can sort of create a fast lane and start selling it. I think that's very telling. And, you know, most telling of all is still what these companies are telling each other when they're talking at meetings, you know, trade events, when they're under oath in court, when they're talking to their own investors. You know, they're very clear that if they can get these rules out of the way, they very much plan to discriminate. They very much plan to look for ways that they can favor their own content and those of their key partners over their competitors. That's why they're spending, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to undermine these rules and overturn them. It isn't because they actually love internet freedom. They're looking for whatever advantages they can get. And they're going to keep pushing that. So I do think those changes are significant, and I think they're just a taste of things to come. And one of the real dangers here is, you know, the way that net neutrality is going to be taken away is going to be subtle. That's the way you get away with it. You do it in the parts of the network that are hard for other people to see. You do it in ways that your average consumer isn't going to know. Why isn't it working? You know, is their Netflix not? Are they getting a spinning wheel of death trying to use Netflix because they're not paying for fast enough internet speeds? Or is it because Comcast is blocking the ports, the pathways that Netflix is using? The harder it is for you to see that, to know what's happening, to be able to ask questions. And if you've got a government watchdog that should be doing that kind of questioning, unwilling or unable to do it, then you can get away with a lot. And that's what these guys want to do. You know, it's not get caught doing the things that are going to put them on the front page of the paper. It's to do the things that no one's really sure what's going on, but it's fundamentally changing the internet experience and giving them an advantage at every step.
We will continue following it. We know that free press, of course, will, as this is one of the key issues. We've been speaking with Craig Aaron, CEO and president of Free Press. Craig, great to have you on again.
Hey, thanks for having me, David. Good to talk to you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
You got to hand it to Republicans. When they find a scapegoat, they will use that scapegoat for everything. And for Congressman Patrick Meehan, who's a Pennsylvania Republican, Obamacare even forced him to sexually harass one of his staffers. What? Yeah, Meehan became sort of obsessed with a young former aide that worked for him. And I guess she at some point started a relationship with someone outside of Meehan's office, like what we would call a normal relationship with someone that was age appropriate for her. And Meehan became sort of curious, and then he became jealous, and then he became hostile. And it ultimately pushed this staffer to start working remotely, and eventually she quit. And Meehan initially denied that he did anything wrong. He eventually ended up settling with the staffer using taxpayer dollars when she filed a formal complaint. And then recently, he talked about the situation with the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he said he developed feelings towards this staffer, that at one point he saw her as his soulmate. That's his quote, not mine. That he was selfish when he found out that she had started this relationship, that they'd sometimes share ice cream after work and he would express his romantic feelings for her, and that he would sometimes hold hugs with her, maybe a little bit longer than was appropriate. It all sounds pretty damn pathetic, to be totally honest with you. But he says he didn't actually sexually harass her. And then this is the gold. He said that he was hostile to her in the first place because of all the pressure he was under from his constituents because of Obamacare. That's right. Constituents were all over him because of Obamacare. And this just got to him so much that he started mistreating a staffer, which is what led to this entire fiasco. You know, when you put it that way, hard to blame the guy for anything, right? I mean, really, it's Obama's fault for even starting the process of creating Obamacare. The party of personal responsibility seems to have no qualms whatsoever finding other people and things to blame for what are very clearly personal decisions. And of course, this isn't the only hypocrisy, because Meehan was also involved in the House Ethics Committee, and he was helping to review claims of sexual harassment against other members of Congress. And Paul Ryan immediately removed Meehan from the House Ethics panel in light of these revelations, and an investigation has started into his behavior. It seems almost like a fake story, right?
Yeah, you know that meme, thanks Obama?
Yeah.
Now we have a new one, thanks Obamacare.
Thanks Obamacare, responsible for anything apparently that Pat Meehan ever did because he was under so much pressure. You can vote this guy out, right? He is up for re-election in the fall, as are all members of Congress. He actually is opposed. Some of these seats run either unopposed or effectively unopposed, where there's like some no money challenger from the opposition party that's never going to have a shot. Meehan is actually expected to have a bit of a tough time in the 2018 election. So I say vote him out right away, because you know what? I support personal responsibility. And if he can't even behave himself with his staff because of the pressure on him, because of Obamacare, it doesn't sound very responsible to me.
Yeah, and he can't take the heat, apparently. I mean, you have the opportunity now to vote for someone who's going to protect the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
Not like this guy.
No, this guy wants it out. And strikes me as just a horrible person to do this. And I don't buy into big picture, like, oh, this is a good person and this is a bad person. People in different circumstances are capable of good and bad and concerning and benevolent actions, and circumstance plays a big role. But this just doesn't sound like someone I would ever want anything to do with.
Yeah, when the report says that he would share ice cream with the staffer,
it
makes me wonder, was it the same ice cream? Because that would be very troubling, I think.
I don't think so. I think they each got, he would get a soy-based ice cream-like product, and the staffer was into coconut milk ice cream. Yeah, so it was both dairy-free, but
that's good, at
not
least.
exactly of the same kind. I have no idea what kind of ice cream they had, but hope it was pistachio. A big marijuana legislation news. The state of Vermont here in the United States, just north of us, our friendly neighbors to the north, but not quite as north as Canada. They have finally and formally legalized marijuana. The governor has signed it into law. This makes Vermont the 9th state to do so. But this was number 1 signed into law by Republican Phil Scott. But most interestingly, the other 8 states that have legalized marijuana have done so by a referendum ballot initiative where the population of the state votes. Vermont did it by legislative decision. The legislature decided this is something that we're going to do. And the law is going to allow people 21 years of age and older to legally possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana. They will also be allowed to grow 2 mature plants and 4 immature cannabis plants. Commercial pot sales will not be allowed, and the law is going to take effect on July 1st. And even though Vermont is a very liberal state, big picture, it's liberal in a slightly different way than some other places. Like, for example, because of its rural nature and low population, even though Vermont is a very liberal or democratic state, we could say, they are much more in favor of gun rights. And guns in Vermont are sort of a different thing than they are in states with more densely populated areas.
Yeah, and that's why Bernie Sanders, who represents Vermont in the Senate, took a lot of heat from that.
That's exactly right,
Democrats.
for his position on that. So Vermont's an interesting place, 9th state to legalize, and that's very, very good news. Now, meanwhile, in Europe, the entire country of Greece is working on an amendment to legalize medical marijuana next month. This is not recreational, but for medicinal uses. Economically, could be good for Greece. Greece certainly needs some economic help, given the troubles that they've had over the last 8 to 10 years, even longer, you could argue. They expect that somewhere between $1.5 billion and 2 billion euros would be invested in the marijuana trade in the coming months. And there are already Greek, Canadian, and Israeli companies interested in getting involved. Now, this is clearly going in the right direction. If cigarettes are legal, there's really no justification for illegal marijuana. That's a major double standard. You all know I've been saying this for years. But really, to be more economically stimulative, I believe that, number 1, Vermont should legalize commercial sales, which they're not doing with this bill. And I believe that Greece should go beyond just medicinal marijuana, which is going to disproportionately benefit corporations. And I think that they need to go further in order to really benefit the population at large and the economy at large.
Yeah, that economic point is interesting. If you actually look at a map of Europe by weed legalization, you see that Greece is joining Spain in the Netherlands, in countries that have legal marijuana or marijuana that's essentially legal.
What about Portugal, though? I thought Portugal was well known for that.
I think it's decriminalized there.
Oh, it's
and all drug use, essentially.
All drug use.
But Spain similarly has been facing some economic hardships, as has Greece.
Yeah, I mean, go beyond just decriminalization and or medicinal legalization if you want the economic benefit. We've got a lot of early data from Colorado already about what the boon has been to their economy. And in the back of my mind, every time we hear about another state doing this, it kind of feels like it's a middle finger to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions, as you might remember, used to like the KKK until he found out that they smoked pot.
Right.
But more importantly, other than that personal opinion, which is weird, he's been doing everything that he can as Attorney General to roll back the liberalization on cannabis policy. And I hope more states continue to assert their constitutionally given states' rights and to keep legalizing in the face of nonsense from Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, it's interesting how 8 of the 9 states now with legal marijuana are blue states.
Yes.
Only 1 is a red one, which is Alaska.
Interesting, but not surprising.
Well, Republicans are supposed to be like the don't tread on me party, right?
Yes, right. Freedom,
Individual
liberty,
freedom.
states' rights, and all of that stuff. You know that that only applies when it's convenient on an issue that they want to use to raise money, like abortion or gay marriage or whatever. They're not really for that. That's just something they say to raise money. Anyway, good news from Vermont, good news from Greece. Hopefully, we'll continue to go in that direction. Hey, here's something really interesting. We've been getting calls from a guy who just calls and basically leaves religious doctrine on our voicemail number. And we played a voicemail from him earlier in the week, and we got another voicemail from him. And a number of people in the audience believe that they've identified this guy. Let's take a listen to his latest voicemail first, and then I'll tell you who people in the audience think that this is.
Hi, David. It's me again. I wanted to add a couple things.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I believe Jesus was or is helping me out in my life because I've had a horrible, horrible life in existence for 54 years.
Yeah.
And that I don't know how many times I've almost lost my life and almost getting in accidents or you know, just things happening. And somebody has gotten me through that. And
okay, I think that's enough for that.
It's not just me.
So anyway, this guy's been calling in, leaving these messages. A bunch of people started emailing me saying, David, that sounds like religious YouTuber Brett Keane, who you're familiar with, right, Pat? You've heard of this guy.
Oh, yeah. He was the chief antagonist on The Drunken Peasants, which is a show that's now defunct.
Yes.
But you're familiar with that show.
I'm familiar with the show. I've been on it. I'm not familiar with this guy. So I went to his YouTube channel. There's definitely a similarity, and I'm going to play it for you. Let's take a listen to this guy, who some in the audience claim is the religious caller.
Oh, boy. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brett Keane from GodTVRadio.com. Today I thought I'd talk about my first experience with seeing someone die.
Yeah, now the voice is very similar, the delivery is similar, but you've said, Pat, that he's not, the caller said he's 54 years old. You didn't think Brett Keane was 54, but that guy looks 54 to me, that guy that you just played a video of.
He does look older than he is, but he's apparently only like 40, 41, 42.
You're telling me that the guy you just showed me video of is 40 years old?
I know it's hard to believe, David. Yeah.
There's no way. Can you put up a still, just like pause the video and put that up so I can get another look and the audience can see it as well? You're telling me that that's a 40-year-old? That guy is only 7 years older than me?
I'm telling you this, yes.
That I have a hard time believing.
It's stunning to the Drunken Peasants community, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not alone here.
All right, well, listen, I don't know if it's Brett Keane who's calling, but interesting, and I'm glad that the audience has gotten involved. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We'll talk about right-wing Twitter bashing Lester Holt. We will talk about an iPhone battery bursting into flame after a man bit his battery. Why did he do that? Well, we'll talk about it on the bonus show. And we will talk about a letter which suggests that 3 Alcatraz inmates survived their 1962 escape and swam to land. I actually have visited Alcatraz several times and am familiar with the story, and I have some thoughts. davidpakman.com/membership, patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. We will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.